Welcome to the Gifted Neurodivergent podcast, a podcast dedicated to the exploration and cultivation of the outside genius found in neurodivergence.
Welcome to the Gifted Neurodivergent podcast. I'm Lillian Skinner. Today we're going to talk to J.D. Goulet. She's a writer I met on Substack, and she moved a year and some ago to Portugal. And I thought it's important that we talk to people who are doing the big things, making the big choices, and getting the heck out of Dodge, because we're going through a quite tumultuous time here in the States. We're headed into collapse, and there are people who are fleeing. And I don't blame them. I wish I was them. It's time to figure out how that works and what our choices are. So today I asked JD to talk about that. Nice to meet you. Do you go by JD?
I do.
Okay. Nice to meet you, JD. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it. My podcast is about people who can mental model. So when I see something mentally model, I reach out and say, want to be on my podcast? Because you're a perfect example of somatic and cognitive giftedness.
Yeah. All right. I think I'm still figuring out the ways that I'm apparently different from other people. So like when you talk about my being able to, use the mental model or whatever, I'm like, oh, okay. I'm like, it's a new concept to me, but I have become aware that like, oh, a lot of ways that there are differences explain a lot, because I think I've moved through most of my life assuming that other people are like me and then realizing they're not. And I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Now I get, like why people are so frustrating is because they're not at all like me.
Yeah. I have always known that I was different, but I've been waiting for everybody to catch up, and it doesn't.
Yeah, it definitely, it explains why, I find a lot of, not all, but a lot of other human beings to be so frustrating, and why others are so endearing, and why I can click with them, because like, oh, you do think like me.
So you live in Portugal?
I do. For just over a year now. I'm outside of the city of Porto.
I would love to know like what got you there, why you chose there, or what pulled you there.
Yeah, I've been there. I lived in Savannah before coming to Portugal, although I'm not by any means a native there. I'm mainly from Washington State, but I've actually lived in I think 8 states, and I think I'm up to 16 cities now that I've lived in. So, but yeah, as far as like the whole thing about Portugal, I feel like that in itself could probably fill a book. We realized definitely by 2022, my partner and I were like, we got to get out of the United States. This is gonna just go up in flames here, and we don't want to be here for that, because we're not capable of a physical fight for sure. I guess a little background context. My partner is a trans former Army Ranger, disabled veteran. My son is trans, and his partner is trans. My other kid is non-binary and has an intersex non-binary partner. They are unfortunately still in the United States, but they did get out of Georgia, not necessarily to a better state. They're in Missouri, so it's kind of like trading one brand of evil for another. But
yeah,
so I worry a lot about them, but they're both disabled, and that presents some challenges for them to be able to have joined us here, because the type of disability that they receive, I can never remember which one is which. There's SSI and SSDI, but anyhow, they receive the type that they would lose benefits if they leave the country for more than 30 days. But anyhow, so obviously as, a trans family, living in Georgia, things were not looking so great for us, and, downright scary, especially because we are both very aware of history and how, like my partner, she's kind of like a World War II walking encyclopedia. It's one of her special interests. And so it's like we could see the parallels to what's going on currently.
It's so crazy. Part of my is researching the education system. We literally imported the Nazi education system over here. It was inevitable that would happen.
Yeah. Well, and like Hitler was a big fan of the United States. Like he was like, oh, what you did to, your native population, I want to figure out how you did that and replicate it here because that was cool.
I did a podcast actually on the identity fluidity for my children podcast because my family, we are all gender neutral. My mom is gender fluid. She's always wearing camis. People are like, is that your mom or your dad? That's my mom. I was so tall as a young kid and I was so athletic. I was pretty sure I was supposed to be a boy for years. I was different. I think that's just part of being neurodivergent. But I also think that I didn't really understand what it meant to be a woman until I had children. When I had children, I delighted in being a woman.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. I landed on a gender for myself a few years ago after my son told me that he was trans. And I think it's just something that I had never, until him, I had never even really heard of the term non-binary or had never been introduced to that concept. And once I was introduced to it and kind of processed through it, in fact, there's a question that both my trans son and my partner have asked me at different times over the years. And it was a question along the lines of, if you woke up tomorrow in the opposite sex body, how would you feel about that? And I know the intention of that question is often to get people who are cisgender to think about like what it would feel like to be in the, quote unquote, wrong body. And for me, I was like, I don't think I'd feel any way about that because I am not my genitals. And I think I'd probably just look down and be like, all right, cool.
That's a shock. And that's it.
And so I definitely realized that I don't have any attachment to my body because I don't consider myself to be what my body is. My body is more just like a billboard or a mannequin for performing whatever I feel like. Anyhow, it's been an interesting journey, I guess you could say. And it kind of goes along with the realizing very late in life in my mid 40s that like, oh, I guess I technically could be diagnosed with autism if I ever pursued that. Been reprocessing through my entire life as one tends to do when you realize something like that later on. And all of a sudden everything seems to click and you're like, and it's funny because when I mentioned to my kids, because both of them are autistic, one officially diagnosed at the age of 3. And both of them were like, yay, you finally figured it out. And like they knew. And they were just like dropping hints apparently that like, Mom, it's not just Dad.
I think good relationships can often be between two neurodivergents because a neurotypical person, a neurodivergent person means somebody's needs are not being on some level, maybe both people's on all levels.
I wish I could say that was the case with B and their dad. We've been divorced for a very, very long time now. And we married very young for all kinds of reasons that in themselves could be, a book. And I've written about it somewhat. But he and I, neither of us realized when we got married in our early 20s that we were autistic. I mean, we're from the generation where that just really wasn't a thing yet. You're just a weird outsider with strange quirks, but really smart. And, but I know that like it was his neurodivergence, even though I didn't have that framework yet, was what attracted me. And, but it was because of all of the social conditioning that told us we should be certain ways that we didn't work out. Like, I think if we had met now, we might have worked out because we would have had a different lens to view everything through. But back then in the 90s, to uninformed, 20-somethings who don't even realize that they're neurodivergent because they don't know neurodivergent is even a thing, And so we were still trying to force ourselves to obey by the social order. And that tore us apart in the end. So it is what it is. I have a wonderful...
So your current partner is not your ex?
No, my current partner is not my ex. Okay. No.
Because the first marriage and that sort of thing happened. But he was neurotypical. And he was in the military. The military is a whole nother level of horror for any marriage, if you ask me.
Yeah, I don't know how my current partner survived the Army. And in fact, she's talked about a lot to me. And she doesn't know how she even survived it, because it's pretty horrible for a neurodivergent person there's trauma. We'll just say there's definitely some trauma there.
So much about controlling you and owning you. If you're at all sensitive, it's such an affront to every single one of your senses.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I know not to ever wake her up by turning the lights on, for example, because that is just going to start the day off wrong for everybody. I mean, I guess I would just quickly mention, just back on the whole Portugal thing, is that what I see online is a lot of people who don't even bother to consider the possibility of leaving, because they just assume that it's so hard or so expensive that it's impossible. So why bother even expending any energy on it? And while it is definitely not for the faint of heart, because I'm not going to try to sugarcoat it, we have been through some really rough, some rough days in the transition to getting here and making a safe space for ourselves here. But it is more possible than people think, although I think it is also getting a bit harder now, because Europe is going through some shit too. And so laws are constantly changing, and they're becoming increasingly less immigrant friendly. But not that this is right, but it is an advantage that I would encourage people to lean on if they're from somewhere like the United States or the UK, is like in Portugal, you definitely get, I think, a bit more accommodated as an immigrant than someone coming from somewhere in the global south, which is really unfortunate and horribly not fair. But we have learned that, oh yeah, that's a thing. You'll get kind of prioritized, and they might be more likely to look the other way when stamping the visa paperwork, kind of a thing. Like, I don't know. I'm hesitant to even say it. But anyhow, I just would encourage that if people are having the thoughts of, boy, I wish I could get out of the U.S., it is possible. I hate to say something like, when there's a will, there's a way, because it's kind of, bullshit advice. But I guess assess your risks. Are the risks of staying worse than the risks of leaving and possibly having an amazing new and longer, healthier, happier life? And when you reach that tipping point, which we definitely did, where like the possibilities of leaving were vastly more promising than what we knew was coming if we'd stayed. And so when you reach that point, there are ways. Especially if you're willing to give up the things that you've become accustomed to. Like, we live in a very small apartment here. We take public transportation almost everywhere we go, which thankfully is really robust and amazing here. And like most of what we need, we can get to on foot. So if you're willing to do what we did, which is just put everything you really need, like some clothes and shoes, in a suitcase and go. Mm-hmm. It's the people who think, oh, I've got to ship all my things in my car and I need to afford a big house. Yeah, you're going to have a hard time doing that. But if you're willing to let go and reassess your priorities in life and decide, what really, really will make you feel fulfilled in life, then don't discount the possibility that you might want to get out too.
It's a really important message, because if we don't, we'll probably end up losing everything anyway. So probably
exactly
willfully than to do it not willfully is a much less traumatizing thing. We're the ones that can see what's coming and prepare for it. Now, as things change, we're going to be the ones who are aware and in front of it. And you're a perfect example. You already moved. You made the hard choices in advance. We gave up our house a couple of years ago, actually. We sold it, and we've been now and moved 4 times in the last 3.5 years. I'm about ready to get rid of everything.
Yeah. I totally identify, only because I did move between 2020 and now. I have moved four times, and yeah, getting rid of everything and just starting over fresh was a little bit painful in some ways, but also it's untethering in a good way.
Yeah, it's very cathartic, and maybe as a creative, it's a cleansing sort of thing, because when you go to a new place, you want to have a new sort of vibe or something like that, especially being Portugal versus the US. I would love to know, how is the difference between the two? Much livelier than the southern US.
Yeah. I haven't been to Spain yet. It's actually kind of difficult to get to Spain from here. there's just the infrastructure is not as robust as in other parts of, the wealthier northern parts of Europe. But I've been to Spain, and I was an exchange student in Germany in the 90s, been all over, England and Scotland. And, but Portugal, I love it. There's just such a slower way of life, which takes some adjusting to, but it's one of the reasons we chose it here. We wanted that. And so you'll get people who, like, let's say you need a shower fixed, but it's not like an urgent thing. It's not like a toilet's backed up or something, but you might wait a while before getting someone in, and they're very like, they'll be like, okay, I'll show up tomorrow. And then they don't show up. And you may or may not hear from them to say, I won't be there. So you'll wait all day, and then they just don't show. And then they'll be like, oh yeah, I'll be there the next day. And it's just but when it's like something more urgent, I don't know, we're still adapting to that and just kind of learning to roll with the different expectations that, like, these people have their lives too, and they've got other people who need them, and they're going to prioritize accordingly. And I guess just kind of learning to trust the process, that they'll get to you when they feel like, given their workload, it's appropriate. But I appreciate that because it's what you want for yourself, right? And so once you kind of see that for what it is, you can appreciate it, even though sometimes it's still a little frustrating. So, but it's like that in everything, like just. And we had been warned even before coming here that, like, oh, Portugal is notorious for its bureaucracy and their love of paperwork and physically putting the rubber stamps on everything. And it's not an exaggeration. Like, people who want to come I would say anywhere in Southern Europe need to be prepared that, like, they're very much a thick bureaucracy. They don't do a whole lot of stuff in computers, and there's a lot of things you have to just show up in person to do, even dealing with like when we moved from one house to another here, you don't just log into an online account and close your water account and your internet account or whatever. And you don't even call, you show up in person and you tell this person, I need to change my water from this address to that one or something. And so it's interesting. It really is. But it's been good for me.
Yeah, I mean, it does teach you patience, because I think we get impatient here. Yeah.
Real quick, I got to tell you this great story. So long story short, we had to go to the Azores because I was trying to sell my house back in the United States. And I learned the hard way that there are certain things that if you don't do before you leave the U.S., you're going to have a hard time. And that is, like, if you're going to sell any kind of property back in the U.S., get a power of attorney before you leave the U.S. I did not do this. So the way to get a power of attorney when you're going to do that, you have to do the one through the embassy. It can't just be any old power of attorney or notary. You have to do the official embassy ones. There's only 2 embassies in Portugal. There's the one in Lisbon and one in the Azores. And the one in Lisbon was booked up for like weeks because they only had like appointments twice a month. And so there was one opening the following week in the Azores embassy. And so I'm like, guess we're taking a trip all of a sudden tomorrow to the Azores. Like, that's not, visiting the Azores, I thought would be a future, nice vacation kind of a thing, not an under duress. Oh my God, we have to do this now. So we go to the Azores, we go to the embassy, get all that done. And the attorney back in the United States for closing on the house is like freaking out and insisting we have to overnight the physical paperwork. And I'm like, we're in the Azores, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Nothing I can do is going to make this paper arrive at your desk within 24 hours. It's just not, like, the fastest possible service is 6 to 8 days. And she's just not believing me. She's just like, surely you just haven't tried hard enough or checked enough FedEx locations.
Surely
and
you
I'm
get
just
on a
like,
plane and handle it.
oh, lady, like, what planet are you on? I'm in the middle of the goddamn, ocean. Like,
Yeah.
And so it was just those kind of things, those American expectations of immediacy that we've grown accustomed to with, like, the Amazonification of everything. And I don't know, I guess there was kind of a sick pleasure inside of me of sticking it to this attorney and being like, that is not how the rest of the world works. I'm sorry. It's just not. Get over yourself. I wonder where there's the perfect balance, though. Like, if anyone, knows where to live, where it's the perfect, not that I'm going to leave. I love Portugal. Don't get me wrong. I do. The people here, the culture, the music, the food, like the weather. It's a great, great place.
How has it affected you creatively? Do you feel like you are able to be more creative now that you have the space or the time? I think time is huge. I think schedules are huge. I think the most creative people really struggle under the schedules of others because we don't have the space to free up our minds to create. So I wondered, do you notice that?
That's another thing that I am still you could say, awakening here, because in the US, there was no, you're just so busy between your work day and your commuting and, all of the other pressures that there's no time to just think. And I found that the only time I had to think was if I'm showering or trying to sleep. And those times were often consumed with thoughts about work, time I wasn't paid for. And it was just really frustrating because I was working at the time, writing and editing and developing online training content for an Ivy League corporate arm. And that, they're just the constant, we need this written, in this period of time, and the pressure to produce quickly. And it's but that's not how my brain works. I don't think that's how anyone's brain works, but certainly not mine. And so I don't work, anymore. Long story short, I'm disabled. I had a TBI from a car accident and, I had a stroke the morning after the accident. And so that's another thing I'm adjusting to here, is not working and learning my new boundaries in this more disabled body. And but having the luxury of just thinking and processing and doing things at my own pace, I think has been really absolutely essential. I am trying to not allow myself to feel pressure to write on Substack, for example. I'm not one of these people who's I'm going to make myself an editorial calendar and I've got these growth goals. And it's just no, I do not roll that way. And I don't want to roll that way. When I have something, when the inspiration hits, I might sit there and write for 8 hours straight until it's done. It will all just pour forth in the moment that's right. And I refuse to allow myself to put pressure on myself anymore to do anything other than that. And so if you look at my Substack, you'll see I might post frantically 3 whole long pieces in a week and then crickets for 2 months. And I'm at a place now where I'm okay with that. That is my natural, and I can, it's funny because I can look back now over time and see that I do have this very wavy creative pattern of silence and then boom, 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 and then nothing. I wish for a world where more people could find out what their patterns were and just work like that. And I feel like it would be so much better for people and the world at large. And I think I am trying to find out how to, within my capacity to do so, to push for that other world where we can just find our own rhythm and have that be enough, and not have to try to fit a certain box in order to receive the things that we need to sustain life.
Thank you for that, because that is so true. It is really hard to be human. It's they have almost removed that from us, particularly in the States. As a creative, that it hurts my ability to produce. And I'm similar to you. I have chronic pain. I have a bunch of labels.
A lot of labels too.
Yeah, we're important. We're the future because we're the ones that will be able to press the change, right?
Yeah. I've long considered myself a change agent. When I came across that phrase years ago, I was oh, change agent, that is such a great term and the meaning. And I was okay, I have found out what my purpose is, I guess, is to be out there on the, the fringes pioneering a possible new course. Because, lots of change agents, but that's not necessarily the way society moves, but you never know. And so, I guess it's always made me kind of the outsider because I am out there on the fringes. But if we don't have those individuals out there, then society just stagnates. We don't progress.
I think that's actually what causes the collapses. Your information gets static. They moved our data from being 3D to 2D. 3D is multidimensional. It has history. Right now, everything's present. When everything's present and the world's changing, that means that society can't keep up. It's a vulnerability.
One thing, I guess, because it feels very relevant to mention here, is that one thing that's so amazing about living in the Porto area is a port city. And so there's a tremendous amount of diversity here. There are immigrants from all over the world. There are creatives from all over the world. And because it can be a little more difficult to break into friend circles of native Portuguese people, we have tended to make most of our friends are other immigrants from all over the world, from Brazil, from Poland, from Romania. And it's just amazing the sheer raw talent that we have encountered here from other parts of the world. We have a busker friend who's half Brazilian and half Japanese musician, brilliant musician. And my Polish friend who I'm about to release an article because I've interviewed them about their new album that they've just released. They're Polish, but they lived in UK for years and studied in London, and now they've been here in Porto for years, and they just have this incredible mind, and their music is like nothing I've ever heard. It's amazing. And I don't know, I just love that about here is that a lot of the people who've come here have come here for similar reasons to us, whether they realize it or not. They're fellow neurodivergents and fellow queer and gender bending type people. And it's just amazing to feel like I'm in this hub where there's just so much connectivity and creativity coming out. It's just neat.
It's awesome. I struggle in the artificial spaces. The grocery stores murder me. The big Walmarts. Do you find is it a little easier in Portugal?
Yeah. Yes. There's not, it's not that there's not big box type stores here, because there certainly are. I tend to not go to them though. So for our groceries, we're a 5-minute walk from this little grocery store that I think is a chain, but it's not one I've ever heard of. It's called Sucremer. And it's small. It has everything you need, and it's pretty chill and not the intensity of the overhead sounds and the fluorescent light. And there's for all of your needs, instead of going they have malls here, but you don't really need to go to them, because if you just walk down any major street in the area, there's going to be all these little ma and pa hole in the wall shops that I love going into. And part of that, I think, is because they have not allowed Amazon into Portugal. It does not exist here. If you want Amazon, which I've never ordered Amazon, so as far as I've been here, you have to get it from Germany or Spain or UK, which is even harder now after Brexit. But anyhow, I feel like I'm please continue to fight off this influence, Portugal, because I don't want to see all of these little mom and pop, shops go. It's wonderful to have that, as opposed to, the shuttered main streets that we find all throughout the US that are gone now because they couldn't keep up with Amazon.
All those little shops, it's really sad that they shut down, but they can open up again. They're a relatively small investment to do it.
Eventually, the, climate change and things are going to bring all of that to an end, whether they want to admit it or not, and they're not going to be capable of adapting to it. So having things in place to still fulfill people's needs when that collapse inevitably happens is definitely on my mind all the time. And I've often been thinking, should I open a little shop here and have all the creatives in the area come and sell their stuff here? And maybe I will be J.D, the Portuguese shop owner one day.
Welcome to J.D. Goulet. Yeah. Robert Goulet play all the time. People love it.
I'll let all of my Brazilian and Polish and all of those friends play their tracks. How about that?
That'd be awesome. That'd be awesome.
Live busking.
When you moved to Portugal, what was the biggest fear?
Oh, God. I don't know that I had fears before coming. I had excitement. It was exciting to feel like I had a chance to get somewhere safe. After arriving, there were definitely some fears of, because of various unforeseen hiccups that, everything would fall apart and unravel and we would end up, homeless on the streets of a foreign country where we didn't speak any of the language yet. That's why I say it's not for the faint of heart. And the more money you have, the more helpful that will be to you. Like when we were in the Azores for that trip that I told you about, there was a time where for the first time in my life that I can think of, I was broke enough and scared enough that I went on one of those mutual app, or mutual aid things on like Discord. It was like, hey, here's our situation. And like one person Venmo'd me $25 that was kind of saved our bacon. Like it made sure that we had enough to eat until we could get back on the plane and go back. Like that was scary. It was genuinely, we've been through some harrowing incidents. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, mainly just the fear that like for unforeseen circumstances that everything would just fall apart and we'd just end up, homeless here. And that has not thankfully come to pass. Things have come together, but it has been by the skin of our teeth, quite literally.
You are brave. You said we should move. It's not that hard, but it feels quite hard.
It's still, again, I tell people to look at your situation and assess your risks. And the risks, there is no doubt in my mind, if I had stayed in the United States, I'd be dead by now. I had a couple of, in addition to that car accident that triggered the stroke, I had a sudden emergency, very serious abdominal surgery in November of 2022. And the healthcare system in Georgia was falling apart so badly that I had too many near-death close calls just from the failure of the system. And for example, with that surgery, they sent me, it's a surgery that I found out if that had been done in Europe, I would have been an inpatient for probably a week and had constant round-the-clock nursing care. In the United States, it was a same-day surgery, and I had an open wound. When I say a wound, I mean like I had a 6-inch smiley face in my abdomen, and they couldn't stitch it shut because I had and if anyone has like body horror, mute. But anyhow, but I had an open wound because there was infection inside, so they couldn't stitch it up. And so my partner had to pack my wound with the gauze and change out that gauze. And she and I both, she almost fainted from the sight of blood. And I remember her calling the hospital and pleading with them to send a home health nurse. And they literally were like, you have to figure this out because there are no nurses. And if you don't figure it out, she's going to die. So suck it up, buttercup. And it was harrowing. I'm getting chills thinking about how horrifying this was because there was such a nursing shortage going on there. And I was going, even though I had supposedly, the good insurance, I was going bankrupt for the privilege of having them damn near kill me. So, here I don't have that issue. I can go to the hospital and I can be seen, and I'm on the national healthcare system here. And the first, I had to go to the hospital here for a relatively minor thing. I had stepped on something that went into my foot, and after several hours of trying, I couldn't get it out. So they were like, go to the hospital. And the experience of just walking away and being like, this isn't going to bankrupt me was just wild. Because in the United States, I would have, gone to any lengths to not go to the hospital, in part because I don't want to sit in a healthcare or in a hospital waiting room for 12 hours only to be treated terribly. And it also, with the car accident that caused the stroke, after I got in that car accident, I didn't go to the hospital because I knew what I was in for. If I went, I was like, I just want to go home. I don't feel well. I had a headache coming on. didn't realize I had a concussion. And the next morning I had the stroke. And I will always wonder, would I have still had the stroke if I'd gone to the hospital? The U.S. shit show. So I think when you realize, when you're like, I can either stay here for more of this and probably be dead within the year, either from violence or my own actions, pretty much anything starts to look better.
I'm so sorry. I totally understand what you're saying. Every time I go to the hospital for surgery, they almost kill me because they don't understand. Sensitive. It's very dangerous for us. And we're white women. It's even worse if you're a minority.
Yep.
And now they're thinking about AI nurses. Great. AI can kill me because I don't fit into its profit margin. Because I'm going to cost too much. Because I'm extra.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess if you reach that point that, that I reached, like I say, anything starts to look, better. And so, and I will say that, like, for all that we've been through here, we are in so much of a better place because we don't fear that we're going to be, murdered in the grocery store. Or, we lived in a neighborhood in Savannah where one of our neighbors across from us had I can't even remember what the term for the flag but it was definitely one of those like revolutionary far right flags flown on his porch. And so we did not feel safe, even in our own neighborhood there. And there were, Confederate flags everywhere you looked. Even the state of Georgia official license plate, you could get an official state license plate with the Confederate flag on it, which just blew my mind when I first saw it. I was like, wow. And so you don't feel safe. And we got to where we weren't even going out and doing anything other than just bare necessities, in fear. And here in Portugal, people are probably surprised to learn that gun ownership is actually allowed in Portugal. It's one of the few European countries that have that, which kind of makes some of the other European countries mad. But it's not awash with guns here. There's not a gun culture. People aren't out in the streets with them. And so just knowing that, like, on that measure alone, we're so much safer here. And I remember processing, over the year that we've lived here, like reevaluating my new sense of self-safety, which has been really interesting because I'll give an example. Early on when we lived here, I remember being out walking the dogs late at night. It's probably midnight. And so the streets are really quiet and I'm walking the dogs and a door opens and a man comes out and he's following behind me as I'm walking the dogs. And as, is, ingrained into me as a woman, a female bodied person in the United States, just my anxiety went up of, bracing myself. This guy's following me. I turned a corner. He's still following me. Like, just anyone would understand what I'm talking about in the U.S., like the walking through a parking garage with your keys in your knuckles kind of a thing. And then telling myself, though, that like, you're in Portugal, this guy's just out walking, doing his thing, and you're safe. And like, it's been a months long process of trying to reassure the body memory that always comes up with anxiety and preparation for, fight or flight. And like trying to intellectually tell my body, we don't have to do this anymore. We're okay. We're safe. Nobody's going to hurt you. But then also still realizing there's bad people anywhere you go. And so you still have to kind of have your wits about you and be smart. Yeah. And it's a weird process of like finding a new sense of balance when it comes to personal safety.
It's a beautiful thing, though, that you're going through that because it's a healing thing. When you have enough power to get away from things that make you unsafe and you get to a place where you do feel safe, which you're going through right now, on the other side of it, it's incredible. There's all this knowledge from being unsafe that you still have, so you can still protect yourself. But there's also the space to process it and use it. You are smarter for having gone through it and been able to get to the safe place. That's the goal. Trauma healed is the greatest teacher. It's really true.
Cool.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
That was one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was like, how is it now that you're over there?
Yeah, so that's actually what I was just going to mention, because I think you will find this interesting, is that in the US, I feel like I had a much better pulse on everything because I was able to see patterns and connect dots, in a certain way to understand the environment I was in. And now I've uprooted myself and put myself in a new environment, and all of that is just like shattered. And so that's been weird, like being in a new place where I'm like, oh, I can't see the patterns anymore because this is a totally new environment. And like that's a thing that you'll encounter is it's like a fresh slate. And I find myself going back to the same habits, though, of trying to build that foundation to help me see the patterns again and connect dots again in my new environment. But because it is an entirely new culture and history and language and everything is new, it's going to be probably my whole lifetime of remapping the world to the intensity and detail that I had in the U.S.
It'll take you 2 years.
I was just going to say that really tracks with other advice that I was given that has been so true. Because we're just a bit beyond the 1 year mark here now. And someone told us that you'll be tired all the time for the first 2 years. Mm-hmm. And it helped to have that awareness. And so that's a thing I will share with anyone who is thinking of moving into a new culture is you will be tired all the time. And we are. But at least having that awareness of like, this is a normal thing and it will pass. So I'm like, hey, just a little, under a year to go and maybe I'll stop feeling so tired all the time. But yeah, just being immersed in a different language and culture and surroundings is just exhausting mentally and physically. So.
Memorizing all the newness along the route. I would come home and have to stare at the wall for about 30 minutes because it was like, it really is this profound thing that you don't realize if you grew up in the same place. The US is very grid-like. It does the same sort of thing. There's times I'll be in one state that looks like the city I just came from or grew up in. It's spooky with the big boxes and stuff like that. But Europe is much more of its own flavor. That will make it easier to memorize it.
Yeah, give you that novelty.
Yeah.
I come from a town in Washington State that sprang up because of the Manhattan Project. And so it was quite literally a grid because the military built it. So all the streets are like named A through whatever, A Street, B Street, C Street. And then the other way was numbers and it's just literally a grid. So yeah, exactly. Here it's more like somebody, took a cobweb and just kind of messed with the cobweb. Real quick, just I would say you were asking about some of the sensory stuff, like with the stores and whatnot. And one bit of advice for more than one reason that if people are considering moving to Portugal, especially if you are a sensitive person, maybe avoid Lisbon. Sorry to anyone in Lisbon, but yeah, their city. I've been down there, I think 3 times now. And it is a sensory nightmare for me in a way that Porto is not. Like even just their public transportation system, being in the train, like getting off the train into the station feels like being in a wind tunnel with a jet engine turned on the other end of it. It's overwhelming. So there's that. It's one of the things I kind of tend to think about. And I was, even before moving here, when I would travel, for a while, I even tried my hand at a little bit of like travel blogging in an old Discord, where I would talk about, here's the disabilities that I have, and here's what it's like for me to travel, in XYZ place. And like, here's the things you need to know if you, are mobility impaired at all, et cetera, et cetera. And that's been especially interesting in traveling in Europe because it is such older infrastructure. And so like a lot of buildings won't have elevators and maybe the stairs are really unsteady and uneven. Maybe the sidewalks are a little more, especially in Portugal, the sidewalks can be pretty broken up. And so there's like a lot of things like that I think about. And so if anyone, ever wants to know more about that, they're welcome to reach out and ask me about it. But overall, I would say avoid Lisbon. It's also just way more expensive and overtaken by other immigrants and which is driving the cost of living up there, it's starting to happen a lot more in Porto too, where even locals can't afford to be in their own place, which is really awful, which is all the more reason we've, picked a kind of out of the way area. And also I just don't like being in heavily populated and touristy areas. So, that's things to consider if people are considering moving to anywhere in Europe and you have any sort of, limitations to maybe check out your environment and know what you're getting into.
Do you have any other recommendations for cities that you like there?
I was going to say I probably have more recommendations for the cities I have not liked. But I really enjoy the smaller off the beaten path areas. Like we did a 13-day, I think it was, road trip through Scotland. And I just really love some of the, like Isle of Skye was incredible. I actually considered wanting to move there pretty strongly, but with Brexit, it made it pretty much impossible for us to live there legally. We've traveled quite a bit now throughout Portugal, and I love Coimbra, and I love there's places that I could see myself living there, but I worry that I would get a little too isolated and bored. But there's plenty of like little villages that are just absolutely beautiful and close to nature and have really cool old, stone architecture with moss growing up the walls and stuff that I just really love. I don't know that I could do that 24/7 all year without feeling pretty bored and lonely. I just really like some of the more forgotten and off the beaten path spaces. I'm not a fan of London at all. It's probably one of my least favorite places, followed by Paris. Paris has its charms, but definitely like 2 days was enough for me. And I'm like, nah.
Yeah.
The Azores were incredible. But again, I don't know I could live there because it is an island and I really hate flying and I do want to be able to see other places. And so in order to see other places, I would always have to fly because I also hate boats. So, but it was just stunningly beautiful.
What's your plan as you go forward? What do you see coming and what are you preparing?
Oh, man. Yeah, the things I see coming in Europe right now with, as I'm still in that process of building new models is not great. And we're, keeping an eye on everything, probably more than is good for us to try to figure out how we're going to best position ourselves. Portugal is, in just the time we've been here, has lurched further to the right, which is really surprising. We didn't expect it because it is a country that, people slightly older than me have a very strong memory of what it was like to live under a fascist dictatorship. So it's kind of surprising to see them going that way again. But the last elections that just happened, a month or two ago, show that is possible even here. It's still, the far right is still small here, and the center right party that took control of the government is refusing to cooperate with the far right, thankfully. And so we're keeping a close eye on that. But, governments all throughout Europe are experiencing these fascist surges. And it's because of the capitalism is just doomed to failure. It's an incoherent, impossible system to expect to have continued growth, and it's unraveling, and that's what's causing the people to fall for, unfortunately, the demonization of immigrants and blaming them instead of blaming putting the blame where it actually belongs. So we're keeping an eye on it, and just we're capable of remaining flexible to put ourselves wherever we can be the most use, to community. It's something that's really important to us is breaking free from the harmful individualism and consumerism that's, so omniprevalent in the United States and the UK, and trying to form strong communities of care, and just remaining flexible. We are light. We have very few belongings, can travel, so just trying to keep an eye and find out where we can do the most good, and just kind of accepting too that, like, even here we may die. Like, it's I hate to end on like that bleak note, but like shit's real bad, and I'm tired of pretending that it's not.
Those of us who are really sensitive need to find each other, because we're going to be the most aware. I don't feel like dying in a space where I'm not surrounded by people that are caring.
Yes.
If you guys run into something, let me know, because we do have that community that's starting in Spain.
There's a similar effort underway here that I've met one of the leaders that's hoping to start this queer sanctuary called Cura Alma. Still in the very early stages, but they have some land in the mountains in northern Portugal that we just went and visited last week. And so it makes me happy to see that those kinds of efforts are kind of popping up all over. So that's something that we, may participate in and help grow and make our last stand up there. Sorry, the dogs are about to go out on their walk, but right now we're just in this space of openness and waiting to, follow whatever speaks to us as being our purpose here.
Thank you so much, JD. It was really a pleasure talking with you. It was really a beautiful story you gave, and I'm glad that you're recovering so well from your stroke. I hope that they take care of you in Portugal. I hope that they appreciate you too. You are an amazing writer. I enjoy your work online. I like your open attitude. I like that you just say it as it is, because too many people are too afraid. I hope that things go well for you and that we can stay in touch.
Thank you. Let's do stay in touch, and good luck to you too.
Thank you. JD Goulet, everybody, do you want to tell where they can reach you and what to follow you on?
Yeah, I'm on Substack. I'm writing just enchantments and discoveries with JD. And I'm also getting fairly active on Blue Sky now, and pretty much not anywhere else. So that's where they can find me right now. Yeah.
Thank you so much, JD. Take care.
The views, information, and opinions expressed on this podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent Gifted ND Incorporated, Lillian Skinner, or the Gifted Neurodivergent podcast. This podcast, Lillian Skinner, and Gifted ND Incorporated are not responsible and do not verify the accuracy of the information contained in this podcast series. The primary purpose of this podcast is to inform and educate. The Gifted Neurodivergent podcast is only available for private, non-commercial use. Any other use of the information contained within this podcast must be done with express written approval and knowledge of Lillian Skinner. You may not edit, modify, or redistribute any part of this podcast. The developer assumes no liability for this podcast or its use on any other podcast or other media.